Hello and welcome to First Flight, a Star Trek Enterprise rewatch podcast where we are watching and discussing each episode of Enterprise in succession. First Flight is a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Network.
This is Commander Tucker of Enterprise. We've got some information you're going to want to hear.
Welcome, Enterprise fans. I am your co-host, Melanie.
And I'm your co-host, Abby.
And tonight we are discussing Oasis, the 19th episode of Season 1. This episode was written by Stephen Beck, based on a story by Rick Berman, Brannon Braga, and Stephen Beck. It was directed by Jim Charleston, and it aired on April 3rd, 2002. But first, we need to issue a read alert.
Tactical alert. All hands to stations.
Just a reminder that First Flight is a fully spoiled podcast. We might end up talking about any part of the show at any time. And now for a recap of Oasis, it's time for Abby's Captain's Log. Okay, Abby, let's go.
Captain Starlog Supplemental.
Okay, Oasis. The crew is directed to a crashed ship that they can salvage for supplies, and they learn that there are more surprises there than the rumored ghosts.
Okay, it's time to deploy our subspace amplifiers and get into this. Abby, what are your thoughts on Oasis?
Okay, we have to start with two of my very favorite things about Enterprise, the cold opens and the food. I forgot how much food there is in this episode until I rewatched for this podcast. And oh my goodness, the close-ups and all the different things, the talk about coffee and the hot spices. This is one of those glorious moments where Enterprise and Chef just deserve heaps of praise. However, to Paul, I would like to take her to a really good vegetarian restaurant because she's eating a very sad plate of veggies again with what looks like a few garbanzo beans and at least 7 full circles of lemon slices all the way around it. Now, I love lemon and I use it all the time, but that's like a whole lemon. Holy banana. That was quite the plate of food there. And I would really like to give her some good vegetarian chili or, a pasta dish like they've eaten previously. Just, take out the chicken. So poor to Paul. But I love that they negotiated with coffee. I love that they were sitting there having this meal with the visiting guest. And it was a wonderful setup for the story. And I think this just plays right into Archer's instincts again about how to negotiate with new aliens. He did it in the last episode, Acquisition, with the Ferengi immediately starting to bargain with them. And then here he is with Damar negotiating again, even though he says it's not a negotiation. So what a fun way to start this episode.
I'm with you, Abby. I noticed T'Pol's plate of veggies as well. And there's way better stuff out there. I loved the whole spicy thing going on here with the spice. That was great. And the sharing of coffee and the conversation and getting hints about this ghost story. I thought there was a real intriguing setup going on here in the cold open, which was carried over into their discussions as to how to proceed. And one of the things I found really interesting when they were sorting out next steps was when Travis said to Archer, sir, this could be a tomb. Do you really think we should be picking through the spare parts? That was a good point. And I liked that Travis felt comfortable saying that because that is a challenging statement to make, but he felt compelled to say it. And it shows again that even though there is a chain of command here, they are a team, they are a family. And Travis did feel comfortable voicing that. And I appreciated that.
Well, and I liked that too, because Travis is our resident ghost story expert. He's the one who, tells the tales by the fire. He's the one later on that is picking up on all the little clues. I mean, he's heard a few ghost stories in his time. And I like that they gave him that line because I think it goes very well with the characterization we've seen this season, that he's thinking about those things, and that is something that would be in his wheelhouse. So it was a nice little moment. And I really also like in that scene that it's Hoshi that's needling at him. And I wish so much that their relationship between Travis and Hoshi had been developed more throughout the seasons, because it is so fun. And they are the most junior of the officers on board that we see regularly. And I like this kind of sibling-like banter and teasing that goes back and forth between them in these early seasons. I think it's really fun.
I like that too, very much, and completely agree that I wish that they had been utilized more and we had seen more conversations between them. And yes, regarding Travis being the resident ghost storyteller, I love that scene in Strange New World.
Oh, yes.
I love that they call it back when Archer says to him, hey, is this another one of your ghost stories? That was a fun little aside. And when they do get down to the ship and start exploring things, I wanted to mention that, first of all, I think the music was really, really good in this scene and very creepy. Good, creepy music. And also wanted to say that I love T'Pol's away suit, or whatever we want to call it.
Yes.
I noticed that she also wore it in Rogue Planet, and that's a really cool away piece there.
I agree. I would wear that in real life. It is beautifully fitted. It's a nice color and it looks functional, which is so cool. And one of the things I always appreciate about the uniforms and the away jackets and all whatever the Enterprise crew wears, they are functional. And that is such a big thing for me. Like, I'm the kind of person who I can't wear things if I don't have pockets because I carry too much stuff. So I appreciate it when they have useful clothing.
Absolutely. And I noticed that we had a return of the quilted windbreaker jackets here.
Woohoo!
I was watching on Rogue Planet, they went back to the smooth ones. And here they're back to the quilted ones, which were ultimately discarded, I think, shortly after this or at some point. So I thought that was interesting. What were your thoughts, Abby, about when they first get on this ship and find the crew?
Well, again, Travis, so smart about the hatch being closed. And that was such a tiny detail, but it was almost the straw that broke the camel's back there. They knew something was weird and things were going on. And then, oh, you're right. And it kind of pushed them to dig deeper right there. So bravo, Travis. And I love that it's T'Pol who figured it all out too. Like, this is just our crew playing to their strengths and really doing what they need to do to make this a successful away mission. And one of the things that I noticed through all this is not only is the music great, but the lighting, especially when they're down on the crash ship. It's incredible. Like, they should get so many props for all the different lighting they did here. The optronic relay room has a different type of lighting than the aeroponics bay does, than the hallway does, than, the engine room has, than any of that. And it is so many shadows and interesting plays on where they stand in the light and the shadows. Bravo. That was one of the first things that jumped out to me.
Yeah, that lighting was really fantastic. I liked this episode, Abby. Is it one of the best for me? No, it's still sort of in the middle of the pack, but I think there are really interesting concepts here about not just the hologram situation, but the living situation of Ezra and Liana living there for so long. It does bring up some interesting questions and some thought-provoking stuff. And one of the questions I had for you as we learn more about their crash story and what's going on and it's figured out is, do the holograms know that they're holograms? Because at one point when Liana's mother says to her, because of your father, I'm alive, I took that as either he made me a hologram and I'm alive and I know that, or your father saved the ship and we're all alive. I wasn't crystal clear on it. What do you think?
Yeah, I thought the same thing. And every time I watched it to prepare for this, I thought something a little bit different. So I wonder if it was left intentionally vague.
Mm.
And then you can kind of make up your own thoughts and theories about where this is. But I also think it's interesting because you can see that even though the captain is not a still living person, he still seems to have the most power for a while in this episode. And as the dynamics change, you can see that changing. And I thought that was really interesting and well done. And I also like the fact that our crew, where they are at this point, they've seen a little bit of hologram technology, but not a ton. So, I mean, if this had been like the Enterprise D or anything that was further along in the timeline, they probably would have gone, oh, these are probably holograms much quicker than our crew did, because it wasn't something that was normal to them. It's not something that they at all expected or even thought was a possibility. So that adds a layer to everything too. And I'm not sure if they are self-aware of their nature or not, but they almost seem like they have to be by the time they get to the fight later, because they walk through the walls.
Oh, right. Of course. And they're being shot at and nothing's happening.
Right. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like they know that earlier on. So I don't know if that was just to let us as the audience not figure it out sooner, or if it was done deliberately vague, or it's something that they can turn on and off, or they go into protection mode. I'm not sure, but I kind of enjoy the fact that there's a lot of gray area there that you can kind of make your own interpretation.
That's a good point. I didn't think about it that way. I like gray area. It's thought provoking. And when I watch this again, I'm going to look more closely at that. I do have a thought. Ezra must be a fantastic engineer. Yes. I know that there are different cultures and different aliens, different states of advancement. But when you really think about it, for him to be able to make holograms, I doubt he was, well, maybe they had photos of the crew in their database, you know, but he had to recreate them exactly, give them knowledge that they had, give them personalities. I mean, to be able to do that, considering we don't have holodeck technology for a couple hundred more years, is pretty astounding.
Yeah, I agree, especially since when we saw the Zerillians, who I know we're going to talk about a little bit later, when we saw their hologram technology, it was mostly just places and sceneries and like place that you can go to interact with the environment, not so much the people. And when they did it for the Klingons, they created Kronos on the holodeck, but it wasn't so much people. So if they created an entire crew again, I mean, granted, he had a long time, but that is some massively impressive engineering. And maybe they should have asked him for, you know, a crash course on holotechnology, because he obviously could write the book.
Right, exactly.
And I also wondered if he programmed them all. I mean, he seems like a lovely man, but you know that there's always some things about other people that you work with that kind of annoy you. How tempting would it be if you recreated the entire crew to like take out the things that annoyed you? You know, oh, that guy, he's always the one, he's always 5 minutes late. I'm going to program him to be very punctual. You know, just stuff like that. So that's a tempting thing to do.
Abby, you're giving me flashbacks to Arik Soong doing genetic engineering in his lab with those embryos. Can we just say now, before we move on, how nice it was to see Renee in this role?
Yes.
He was terrific.
Especially right now where we are. It was great to see him then. It is great to see him now after he passed. And we are just, when we're recording this, just a little bit out from when Prodigy honored him in Kobayashi. And that was beautiful too. And it made this almost more poignant because of it. And I'll tell you, every time that we can let him just have a monologue, everything gets a little better. Like, he's such an emotive actor. And to see his whole face, when usually when he was in Odo makeup, you didn't see all of that. And he still did a great job. This was like a cherry on top of a sundae. He is fantastic. And his parts of this episode are really lovely.
Well said. My sentiments exactly. So shall we talk about Trip and Liana?
We should.
Your thoughts?
All right. So the first scene, so awkward, like so awkward. She's not talking. She's just lurking. It feels to me like she's opening her eyes extra big. And I always wonder when I see this, and I've wondered it since the first time, he's a really good engineer, and not saying that she and Ezreal are not. And I know they've tweaked some things, but do you think he almost touched that live plasma feed on purpose? I mean, how could that be so powerful? And I mean, I know they moved things, but you think as the engineer, he would have seen that before he almost fried himself? Maybe he was trying to get her to talk. That's what I always kind of took it as. And then he just let her take the credit for that.
No, that's a really interesting read. That did not cross my mind at all. So that's a very interesting theory. I agree with you. At the beginning, she almost struck me as an android. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Or like Stepford wifey. And I don't mean that in any type of criticism to Annie Wershing or anything. It's just, I think it was the way it was written and played.
Yes.
So I liked when she loosened up. But at the beginning there, it was, when you don't know the story, and let's say you're watching it for the first time, it does make you wonder what's going on here. I just have to mention that her wig reminds me of Cass.
Yes, I thought that too.
And I really wish they had let her just have her own hair.
Yeah, because she's got great hair.
She has great hair. This is a really young Annie Wershing here. So wonderful to see her here. Personally, I liked their relationship. I thought it was natural. I thought it was honest. It was endearing. I thought Trip was very charming and polite. And I know T'Pol gives him tons of grief, and we'll probably talk about that at some point. But I don't think he deserved it. I thought he was nothing but a gentleman, just making conversation. Sure, he was probably interested, but he was Trip. And I kind of liked their connection.
Yeah. And, you know, this really made me think that this episode is so perfectly what Trip is in his essence pre-Zindi attack.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he wants to believe the best in everyone. He doesn't want to believe that she's concealing anything. He's open. He's completely friendly. There's none of that cynicism or the darkness that we see later after things kind of go south. And that's amazing. Like, when you think kind of about the Trip arc and you think about like Unexpected and then this one and then Dawn to Cogenitor to baby Elizabeth at the end, like, what an incredible arc. And this episode really encapsulates that wholesomeness that he had that kind of took a back seat later on in the seasons. And I just want to hug him. Like, he's so disappointed that this wasn't just someone who needed their engines fixed and a good first contact. And I just want to be like, it's okay. It's okay, Trip. It's okay. Because it is so his boundless enthusiasm for everything and his general kindness.
Abby, you really expressed what I was feeling so well, because I agree. And I have to give credit to the writers here. His dialogue, the way that he's interacting, like the things he just says in his natural conversations were great. And it did give us a snapshot into who is Trip Tucker. And I liked that. I did have one question about towards the end when she asks Shalott to leave the room, to leave them alone, right?
Uh-huh.
Obviously, that was not the wisest thing for the Shalott hologram to do, because clearly there was some questioning if they were in cahoots at that point. So it made me wonder, when she said, oh, he's supposed to do what I say, do you think Ezreal programmed them to, quote unquote, obey her? Because it seemed odd that he would leave the room. You know what I mean?
I have a note that says almost exactly that. It says, all Lyanna had to say to that guard was, it's all right. I mean, you're being a guard. Shalott was being a guard. That's not very guarding. It's not guardful. So he must have programmed them to do that. And I'm guessing that she hasn't had the need to use that before very often. I mean, if at all. I mean, maybe when she was little to get extra dessert or something. But I think that that's interesting. And I wondered then too, if they listen to her, just under Ezreal, because then later when they're having the whole fight and they're telling them to leave and all that jazz, and she goes, tell them to stop. They'll listen to you. Well, wouldn't they listen to her too? Or maybe I just don't know. And I don't know how specific it is. And again, it's that gray area. We get to kind of make our own decisions about how these holograms are going in there. And in a way that's frustrating, but in a way that's really good, because you can interpret it in the way that makes the most sense and has the most depth for you.
Yep, I agree. I wanted to talk a little bit about their goodbye, just since we're talking about them, and then we can backtrack towards other parts of the episode. When they have their goodbye and their kiss, and she makes that comment to him, it totally made me think of a TOS callback. At the end of Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, when Jillian kisses Kirk and says, "See you around the galaxy," I totally thought of that.
I thought of the same thing. But I also thought two things. What if not all aliens kiss like we do? Because that was kind of forward. I mean, maybe they're aliens that touch fingers or elbows or knees or, rub shoulders or something. So but that's a general sci-fi thing. Like, how convenient that all different species of aliens that look somewhat like us show affection in the same way. But this episode always makes me wonder too, at the end there, what if she had stayed on Enterprise? What if? I mean, we know she's a great actress. We know that there's, only a third of the crew is female. She could have added on. I wonder if they had, obviously they didn't want another series regular, but even if she had been a reoccurring character like Cutler and worked in engineering with Trip, and they could have had a friendship or more. It always just makes me wonder what could have happened if they had gone in that direction.
Ooh, that is intriguing. That makes me wonder as well. There are a few things I wanted to point out sort of towards the middle to end of this episode when our crew was figuring out what was going on. I really liked the scene in the back of the bridge. I love that back of the bridge pseudo conference room area. Because this ship is streamlined. There is no conference room. I love that area because they have some great discussions and figures do problem solving there. But I really liked when Malcolm was presenting that information to Archer, and Archer's like, "Oh, you're not buying it." And they were figuring it out together. I thought that was really cool scene. Also, when they brought the escape pod on, this was my backup Porthos pick because I thought that was creepy and well done. And then Phlox is like, "Well, I guess you don't need my services." There was a nice creep factor to that whole sequence that I thought was well done. And then down on the ship, when T'Pol starts figuring things out and the holograms are saying to her, "This keeps us alive," and another time, and optronic relays and all of that. Every time she figures something out by what they're saying to her, she shoots them this look, this knowing look, like, I'm getting it. And I appreciated that.
Yeah. Jumping back to your first point, I love that little conference-y area as well. And I love Malcolm doing his job again. Like that might be one of the highlights of this rewatch for me because wow, that's his job. He's poking holes in the story. That's exactly what he's supposed to be doing. And then he makes a great rescue plan too. Like, bravo, Malcolm, gold stars all around. I really appreciate him more and more. And yeah, I thought that the scene where they get the escape pod, it was the first time very surprising. Like, I remember thinking, ooh, gross. That's not what I expected. A dead someone we know. Because you kind of expected it to be something unpleasant, but not that. And that kind of is where the episode really picked up for me. Once they realized that things were not the way that they seemed. And we knew it earlier as an audience, but once the crew starts knowing it, that's when I really feel that we got some of that momentum going for the rest of it. And man, T'Pol's looks are probably one of my favorite parts of this episode, because she gets a lot of those. And, I can just not compliment enough the face acting. Every episode, she does so much with so little, and it's beautiful. My last little thing about the middle in there is I would like to state that Trip got a gorgeous lunch, that stuffed squash dish. And I bet T'Pol could have eaten that because I didn't see them keeping any chickens or anything around. So I bet that was straight from the aeroponics bay. Share that with T'Pol. Isn't she working somewhere just down the hallway?
That was cool.
All right, so let's move into the part where we have the confrontation with the holograms and the fight down on the crashed ship. And this was interesting because this is how we had old school, Berman era holograms fight. You could shoot at them and it would go right through. Life went on. It was so interesting to me because I had just watched hologram Janeway fight the Diviner on Prodigy, where she, popped in and out and did all sorts of things. And I was like, wow, look at our holograms learning how to defend themselves a little bit better in this. But at the same time, these guys were doing a great job by, walking through walls, showing up at dead ends, doing everything that they needed to do to have their way prevail. Though I do wonder, when they disappear, the phasers don't. So how did they get those phasers to go through the walls with them? Or did they have a stash in every room?
I hadn't thought of that. I liked this a lot too. And that's a good point about holograms learning to defend themselves. Prodigy spoilers, that was super cool. I think one of my favorite parts of this shootout at the end, which again was so well done, like you said, with the lighting and the darkness. And again, we have that creep factor. Even though we know what's going on, I still think it was effective. I liked when they told Archer to go and Archer says, "Not without my officers."
Yes.
Good Archer moment there.
And he's got so much feeling behind just those few little words.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Should we move on to the ready room scene at the end where we get to see Archer and Ezra all chatting?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. Like you said, we get to see Renee emote here, and there was a lot of passion and feeling behind this scene and the writing and all of that, because it does present the dilemma of the episode. It's easy for me to say, and I do agree with Trip. Trip makes some really valid points, like they didn't need any medical care until now. What if Liana, falls and breaks her arm, or there's an emergency? Or even better point, what happens after Ezra dies and she's alone?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that was well thought through. I thought Trip made valid points, and I agree with him. There is a bit of illogic in here, almost bordering on absurd, that they would actually be able to survive 22 years in this way. So while I 100% agree with Trip, also I'm not in Ezra's shoes, and I can also understand that this is their way of life, and these people are special to him, and he makes valid points as well. So I try to have empathy, and I think the dilemma was presented really well, but I definitely see both sides of it, and I think he made the right decision. But I thought the whole concept overall was intriguing.
Yeah, and it made me think about all of this as a parent, because he feels so much guilt for letting the rest of his crew die to save his daughter, which, like Archer said, pretty much any parent would do. I mean, if one of my girls was in danger, forget the rest of the world, I'm saving my baby. So I think that's a really interesting mix there. What's best for her? He saved her. He did what was best for her versus what was best for the majority of the crew. And now it's almost like he thinks it's his sole responsibility to keep her isolated and here and still knowing these people that he sacrificed for her. And that's hard. But I also think that the only way that you were going to get them off this planet and for him to agree was to appeal to him as a father and to have him think about how much more he wants for her. I mean, what if she wants a family? That's not going to really happen if they're there. And that's something that's so vital to him. I don't think he'd want to deny that to her. So I think it was the only way to resolve this in a way that really let Liana go out into the universe. And the other thing that struck me in this scene was how Archer just let him talk. Like, he's actively listening. He's making some, nods here and there, or some go on motions, but he's not talking, and he's not like giving his opinion in nonverbal ways. He's just letting him work it out. And I think that's interesting because besides Liana, they're really the first people that they've talked to in 2 decades. So he hasn't had a sounding board like this to be able to have somebody who he hasn't programmed and put together to give feedback back. And I think that was really powerful on both sides, to see Archer just letting it play out and to see Ezreal coming to these conclusions as he monologues. It was very nice. And the little meta part where he got to say, I haven't been in space for a long time, it's strange but good, just makes me chuckle every time.
Abby, you've given me a lot to think about here. That is so interesting. I agree. I love the way Archer was in this scene. He offered him the tea, sit down, I'll listen. Yes, I love the way he did the active listening. Completely agree with you. I'm glad you brought that up. And we're really seeing Archer continue to evolve as a captain throughout this season, as a person, as a captain. He's having all these experiences thrown at him, which he needs to respond to. And this is a beautiful example of the Archer that we know and love. It's time for our Porthos Pick, which is our favorite part of the episode. I'm really curious, Abby, what's your favorite part?
All right, so this one is interesting because I really enjoy this part of the episode, even though I don't enjoy what one of the characters is doing in this part. And it's T'Pol razzing Trip about the Xyrillian and how Liana reminds her of his interaction with the Xyrillians, because I don't think T'Pol should have said, she was just rude. It was nasty. It wasn't the fun banter and the good relationship that they'd had. However, the reason I like it is because of how Trip reacts to it. And he's looking at her going, she's a good engineer. They were both good engineers. I don't know what you're going on about. And he throws it back to her later in the computer core about how he can fix things because of the Xyrillian ship. And her face when he says that, that face itself could be my Porthos pick alone, because it is shock and like horror and almost like, that's his mic drop moment right there. So it was her reacting to that. And it was great. And I also love how that even continues into the ready room where Malcolm and Trip and Archer are talking. And Trip thinks that T'Pol has told Archer about he and Liana and what she thinks is going on. And Archer's like, this has nothing to do with that. And his embarrassment, we can feel that. Like, we have all been in a situation where we've put our foot in our mouth like that. And you just cringe right along with him. And it's just really well done. And that little bit of building their relationship and some of that jealousy early on before everything that we know is to come. And I really enjoy that.
Abby, I am so glad you brought this up, because this did cross my mind also. First of all, that ready room scene. Yes, I can actually understand why Trip assumed that.
Yep.
Based on all the crap Archer gave him and unexpected. So I totally saw where Trip was coming from. And yes, the embarrassment was palpable. As far as the scene with T'Pol, I am 1,000% in agreement with you. Everybody knows you and I both are huge fans of T'Pol. I love T'Pol. But in this scene, they definitely wrote it in a way where I found it to be bordering on, maybe obnoxious is a strong word, but it was rude. And just the way she did it in Unexpected also, I did not like what she said to him. And I think you're right. I think they are trying to write in a bit of a jealous aspect here. I could be wrong, but they definitely imply that. It's hard to read. And it does set up interesting future dynamics with them. So that was a really interesting part of the episode and a great Porthos pick.
So how about you? What's your favorite part this time?
My part is just a quick throwaway moment, but it just resonated with me and made me smile and beam with pride for the moment, which is when Ezral said to Archer, "Captain, you have a beautiful ship." And Archer says, "Thanks. We're pretty proud of her."
Yes.
That just got me.
Yeah, every Enterprise fan who watches that smiles when that's said, because it is true for all of us as well.
Accessing library computer data.
Okay, it's time to share some trivia. Abby, what can you tell us about Oasis?
So I have a really interesting but mysterious one this time. In the credits, if you watch carefully down pretty far into them, you see that there are hand doubles listed for Jolene Blaylock, Dominic Keating, and Connor Trenier. And nobody quite knows what they were used for in this episode. Because, it takes a lot to hire hand doubles for 3 people, and it's not like anybody got stabbed in the hand or broke a finger or any. So it's one of those unknown things why 3 hand doubles are credited in this episode.
No way. I had no idea about that, Abby, and that is fascinating to me. Now, if I rewatch the episode, I'm looking at the hands. I wonder if like Mike Okuda or Larry Nemechek or somebody knows this. We have to find out. If anybody knows why hand doubles were used, let us know. That's great, Abby. Thank you.
All right. So how about you? What'd you find out about Oasis?
Okay. I wanted to talk about Annie Wersching, who I adore. She's one of my favorites. I loved her in the show 24. I loved her in Timeless. So it was great to see her in probably one of her first roles. My trivia is that she is set to play the Borg Queen in season 2 of Star Trek Picard. And I am so excited about that.
Oh, I am so excited about that too. I cannot wait because every little bit of footage I've seen of her in that looks just delicious. And we know how good she was when this was made 2 decades ago, and she has only improved. So thank you for staying in part of our Star Trek family.
Transfer of data is complete.
Well, we've arrived at our Vulcan's verdict. On a scale of 1 to 10 grapplers, what are you giving Oasis, Abby?
Well, this one was good, and there's nothing in it that really made me upset or cringe or go, oh, this didn't age well. But it also kind of feels like a retread of a lot of things that we have done previously in Enterprise and in Star Trek. But just having Renee in it makes it beautiful. And so this one gets a solid 7 out of 10 for me.
Okay. For me, I agree with you. I know this episode gets some flack for being a retread of Shadow Play from DS9, which is one of my favorite episodes. I love that episode. And as I mentioned earlier, it is a little more middle of the road for me. I don't dislike it. I don't think it's spectacular, but I do think there are some interesting concepts here. I think the acting is really good in this one. Yeah. There's some thought-provoking stuff. And as you said, Renee is always a treat. So I ended up giving it a 6.5 out of 10 grapplers.
My chronometer's running backwards, sir.
Incoming transmission.
You read my letter?
Well, it's time for Daniels to send us back in the timeline so we can hear your thoughts. Abby, what do you have for us tonight?
All right. I'm going back to one from our last episode, Acquisition, where we saw the Ferengi on Enterprise. And this is from one of our listeners who talked to us on Twitter, Stuart McIlwin, who's at Darth Emiras, Emiras, and he said, I was one of those who eye-rolled when the Ferengi turned up in Enterprise. It was a very lighthearted episode, and the guest stars are excellent. For me, though, it was an inconsistency I feared would happen with the prequel series. I headcanoned it to an effect of the TCW, the Temporal Cold War. And I have to say, you know what? I never thought about the temporal Cold War doing these retcons or whatever for the inconsistencies, but that's going to be one of my go-tos now because time travel explains it all, right? So thank you, Stuart, for broadening my horizons on that one.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciated Stuart's take on this also, and I hear where he's coming from, and I love his headcanon. That was awesome. And if you would like to continue the discussion with us or share any of your thoughts, you can reach us at First Flight Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And Abby, what's the best way to contact you?
Best way to find me is on Twitter, and I'm at Abby M. Sommer. That's SOMMER.
We want to thank you again for spending this time with us, and we'll be back next time with Detained, the 20th episode of Season 1. Wow, we're getting up there, Abby.
Getting close to the end.
And as always, we leave you with this quote from Captain Jonathan Archer. The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other.